It's time for another Dice Tower review with Z. Garcia.
Pandemic is an amazing cooperative board game. It's no secret I'm a big fan of it. I find its theme to be captivating, the mechanisms are clever and engaging, and so what happens when you take that game and you change that theme, and you twist those mechanisms? Well, in that case, you get Pandemic Iberia. Pandemic Iberia is a game in the line of Pandemic set in the mid-1800s, and it is a game I was very excited to find out more about. I was very excited to get my hands on it and play it, and so I have, and I am here to tell you a little bit about it today. Can it possibly live up to Pandemic, a game I consider to be very much a modern classic? Let's find out. Your objective in the game is to research all 4 diseases down here, and if you are able to do that before you run out of time, before there are too many outbreaks, the deck of cards runs out, several other things, then you will win the game. The game is largely like Pandemic, and I'm going to give you a brief overview of the general mechanisms of Pandemic so you understand in case you're not familiar with that. And then after that, I'll go ahead and tell you the differences in this one, okay? So, first thing is, each player in turn is going to follow the order of play right here, which is quite simple. On your turn, you are going to take 4 actions. Those actions are represented to you right here on your little card, which I'll put up on the screen for you. And after you've done those 4 actions, you will then draw 2 cards from this deck of cards into your hand. And after that, you are going to infect cities. Infecting cities implies flipping over some cards from here and adding cubes that represent that disease onto the board in the place indicated. You're going to do 2 of these cards at the beginning of the game, but that will ramp up throughout the game. And then at the end of that turn, that's it. You have to check that your hand limit is intact. You can have up to 7 cards, and then it'll be the next player's turn. And so throughout the game, the general idea is you're going to be moving around the board by carriage or by ship. You are going to be treating disease in different places, taking these off of the board to prevent them from outbreaking. If there are too many in one place, they will outbreak, spread out, and of course we track that there has been an outbreak, which you want to prevent. You are also going to be sharing knowledge, which means if players are in the same place, then they can pass the card from their hand that matches that location. They can either give it on your turn, you can give it, or you could receive it from someone else. And so that's another action you can take, among several others. And the objective, again, is to research all 4 of these, which you do while you are in a hospital. So, for example, you are going to have to build this hospital. It's blue, so we'll put it in a blue location. And if you are there, you can discard 5 blue cards from your hand, and you have now researched that disease. You will mark that you've done so by putting that there. And you do that 3 more times after that first one, you win the whole thing. That's the basis of the game. Now, this version has a few differences from regular Pandemic in ways that are both logical and new and interesting. So, for example, the game takes place in the mid-1800s, so there was no flight. And in this one, you will not be discarding cards to fly from one place to another. The traveling in this game is considerably different. You can go from a port city to another port city. They have a little anchor symbol next to them, and you can discard the color of where you're going to travel there. For instance, I could discard Valencia here, and I could travel, let's say this is me, I'm over here, to any yellow city that is a port city. I could go up here, for example. So that is one of my actions. I can also, if I'm on the board somewhere and I would like to work on the train infrastructure, so laying down train tracks, I can do that for an action. And wherever I am, I can play a piece of train track here next to my city in order to make movement a little easier later on. It's very clever. The way this works is, if throughout the game we are going to be building up the railroad, and on your turn later on, if you are starting in a city next to railroad tracks, well, you can, for one single action, travel over the railroad until you want to stop. As long as the whole movement took place over the tracks, it's a single action. And so this is something that is going to require your attention and involvement, but if you get it built up nicely, it will allow you to move quickly around the board. So there is that action as well. One last thing I want to mention is purifying water, which you can do on your turn for an action. You can discard a card. Let's say, again, I am here. I can discard a card of the color of any city next to a region in which I am and play out some purified waters and purification tokens here. So, first of all, what is a region? Well, a region is the negative space, if you would, between these lines of transportation. So, this space in here is one region. This is one region as well, also next to me, standing in Ciudad Real. And this is one region as well, okay? So a city touching that region could be black for these, or even blue. And so standing there, I could discard this blue card, and then I will put out 2 purified water tokens. What they do is quite simply, next time I would add a disease cube to any one of the cities bordering that region, I will not add the cube. Instead, I will remove some purified water. And this is going to allow you to keep these diseases from going haywire, because in this game, as is representative of the time period, you cannot cure these diseases. You can't even treat them particularly well. You are just researching them. And so once you have done that research, you do not necessarily get any better at fighting that disease. Hence, you need purified water to keep everything at bay. At the beginning of the game, each player is also given a special character, and you are going to utilize their special powers throughout the game to help you be more efficient at several different things, like the sailor, for example, who, when traveling from port to port, does not need a card of the color to which they are traveling. They need no card at all. And there's a few different ones. I'm just going to give you a quick look at them here. Royal Academy Scientist, and each one, of course, having thematic powers to whatever it is they say they do, but also powers that tie into the world state in this Iberian Peninsula region at the time in which the game takes place. And so, as you can see here, there are several different ones, each with 1 or 2 powers across the bottom. And there are also some special actions that you are going to shuffle into the deck at the beginning of the game. Depending on the number of players, you add a certain number of these. And they are also going to allow you some special powers, just like in base Pandemic, but these are variations of that, and they utilize these new concepts of purified water and regions, which is also a new idea, in order to enhance the gameplay experience. Those 2 things are the main new innovations in the game. And so there you go. Those are some of the new cards there. Just giving you a quick look at some of them. I also want to talk about a couple of variants that you can play with throughout the game. After you've played a few times, I would recommend you try these out. And they are quite simple. The first one deals with the movement of patients. The influx of patients variant involves the concept of patients making their way to these hospitals once you've built them, and overwhelming them sometimes. So movement of the cubes on the board towards the hospitals. I should mention, by the way, that there are the hospitals come in each color. They're color-coded to the disease, because in this game, to cure a disease, or rather to research that disease, you need to go to the matching hospital, okay? So for me to research yellow, I can only do it at this yellow hospital. Once it's built, however, during every round, the closest patient is going to make their way to the hospital. And eventually, unless you are careful, you might overwhelm the hospital. And if it is overwhelmed, then all the patients will run away from it. And there is this cyclical sort of concept of attraction. And then if it gets overwhelmed, everybody runs away, but they'll start making their way back in again. It's a very interesting idea, which replicates the time period's concept of rushing into these hospitals to seek aid. And it's done quite well. And there's another one, another variant that you can play with, which will give the diseases their own special power, their own special identity, if you would. And there are 4 of these cards here. And at the beginning of the game, you can flip over anywhere between 1 and 4. So let's say we want to play not so difficult, and we'll flip over 1. And in this case, it is typhus, and it makes that disease, so the red disease, typhus, different for the entirety of the game, harder to deal with. And there are different ones, one for each of the diseases. And you can, again, only flip over 1. Just deal with that new challenge for the entire game. Or if you're feeling particularly brave, you could flip over 2, 3, even all 4, which would make the game considerably more difficult. But it's a nice twist, and it certainly gives the whole game a little more personality when you know that you are, for example, dealing with malaria instead of just, oh yeah, the black cubes, Very nicely done, very thematic. The powers that the diseases have are, they give you a little flavor text at the bottom here, which tells you why they are the power they are. It's done with a lot of care, and that is very apparent. So there you have it. That's basically it. You are going to be taking your actions, moving about, drawing your player cards, hoping that these don't come up, of course, but when they do, dealing with them, trying to keep everything at bay. And once you research all 4 of the diseases without things going too wrong and you losing, well then, you win Pandemic Iberia. I'll just come right out and say it. This game is fantastic. It is gorgeous to look at. It is a pleasure to play. The game mechanisms that have been added onto the original game, that have been morphed from the original game, are very strong. They are captivating. They did a great job of putting you in the time period. The look of the whole thing is fantastic. And I have a hard time coming up with anything that I dislike in the game. Now, I have a couple of minor nitpicks about it. For example, some of the connections on the map could be a little bit longer so that they would fit the railroad tracks here a bit better. Some of the ones on the board, especially in the upper left-hand part of the map, are a little short between city and city. So these barely fit on there and accommodate cubes and or pawns as well. So that's a little bit unfortunate, but again, it's a very minor detail. Also, some of the lines of the topography that have been drawn onto the map are they tend to be the same color as the lines that connect city to city, and so sometimes you're going to have a little bit of a hard time seeing what a zone is. The sections of the map brought together by the cities, they can be a little bit hard to discern one from another. But again, once you've played the game one time or two, you will not have that problem. It's a very minor issue. Other than that, I think the game is a slam dunk. It's a really well done game. I think it is different enough from Pandemic to warrant playing both, possibly owning both. And I think it's similar enough that folks that want something new in that line of games are going to get it. This is not going to... It isn't going to surprise you by how completely different it is to the point that you go, oh, this isn't quite Pandemic anymore, And I think that's it's a fine line. It's a careful balance that must be struck, and this game has done it. I think it's fantastic. Love the new limitations to movement also, and building up the railroad gets around that nicely. It's very deliberately paced, but once you get that infrastructure in place, you are going to have a fun time just zipping around the board on the railroads, and just a great game. Special powers are good. The special cards that go into the deck, the events, they're very strong and interesting. And I love the variants, especially giving the diseases their own personality is very cool. And again, it's difficult. You don't want to go crazy throwing all 4 of those in there all at once, but having them behave in different ways is fantastic and very well done. So there you have it. That's it for me. Not a whole lot more gushing I can do about this game. Pandemic Iberia. If you like Pandemic at all, you are going to like this game. Now, if you hated Pandemic, I think you can probably safely avoid this. Again, it's going to give you a somewhat similar feel, but if this intrigues you at all, you will not be disappointed. 2 thumbs way up from me, Pandemic Iberia.
Thanks so much for watching the Dice Tower videos. Find more great videos and reviews, as well as our top-rated audio podcast at Dicetower.com. You can also find other great shows at Dicetowernetwork.com. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower. The Dice Tower is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc., where you can find great games for great prices. Cool stuff in stock. Check them out at CoolStuffInc.com.